Missy's a Republican, but she's one of the good ones.
Ha! Ha! We're continuing our conversation with Missy Sorg, discussing political differences and how we can resolve and get into this, out of the problem and get into the solution.
So like I was talking about with the abortion issue, as a Republican, I feel that abortion should be an option under certain circumstances. I don't think that it should be abused, and I think that most people would agree with that. I'm curious to have conversations with women who support abortion. Do they realize that Pennsylvania allows abortion up to 24 weeks? A lot of them probably don't. They probably think that we're one of those 6-week or less states.
So how do you answer people who claim that Republicans are not pro-life, they're pro-birth? I believe that Republicans are pro-life. However, with the elimination of a lot of the safety nets, that I think a lot of the MAGA force is pro-birth rather than pro-life. How are we going to support these individuals after they were born?
And that's part of the solution with it. So
Yes, let's get into the solution.
So here's my thing. Again, I went through the fertility, the infertility, not the fertility treatments for infertility. We talked about we talked about adoption, and there isn't really a whole lot. There are adoption options within the United States, but those lists are so long and so difficult to get onto. And it comes down to, well, if you want to adopt a baby, good luck, because, there are long lists for adopting a baby. I have friends who went through instead of straight up adoption, they went through the foster system, and they fostered to adoption type of situation. And I think that that's a great opportunity for things because, again, some of these children are born into a situation that they have no control over. And it might be, pardon my language, a shitty situation. So if the state steps in and says, you're doing drugs instead of watching your kid, we've had some health calls, your kid comes into school bruised every time, or your kid doesn't come to school at all. Like those are things that are of concern, that a parent is not parenting the child properly. And it's creating a concern, especially health-wise, for the child. So CYS is going to step in. We're going to take that child. Now, CYS tries to keep the child with family.
Absolutely.
And I do appreciate that, because if a grandparent, an aunt, or an uncle can step in and take care of the child, that's what the preference is, so that the child isn't removed fully from the family. But if that's not an option, foster comes in, and there are a lot of things that could be improved with regard to the foster situation. And again, that whole foster adoption thing, I think would be something that's beneficial. Here's another question with regard to the abortion issue that I'm going to ask. Where's the father's say in this? A lot of times the father doesn't even know that she's pregnant, and she goes and gets an abortion. And again, it's a two-way street. It takes two to tango, as they say. That's another question I think that comes into it, is where does that come into play? It's such a wide discussion, and we're only starting to fully delve into it. And I think that there's a lot more work that needs to be done. We touched upon the fact that situations of rape or incest. I had a conversation that was with a group of Republicans the other night when we did our podcast. And I made a very not Republican statement about abortion. That if my child is going to be born with Down syndrome, there are variations of Down syndrome that require, lifelong care versus, they'll be able to kind of sustain themselves and develop on their own, and, be able to be adults out into the world without having lifelong parental care. Okay. But there are also circumstances where that and other health conditions develop that require the parent to be there lifelong. I have a cousin who has some mental deficiencies when he was a child. He has grand mal seizures, and his brain, my understanding of it is his brain didn't fully develop properly. He can do things on his own, but he has to have somebody with him. He can't live fully on his own. Um, both of his parents are deceased.
Mm.
So his brother is now taking care of him. And he lives in a like adult care facility
Yes.
where he's independent, but there's somebody there to kind of guide him and direct him when needed.
Sure.
But as a parent, if I had the concern that my child would grow up and I would have to take care of them lifelong, I don't mind taking care of my child lifelong, like if that's the case. What happens after I am gone? That's the concern. And I think that decision comes down to the parents. They need to have a discussion and they need to determine, hey, this is going to be a rough, long haul. Um, Financially, that's another consideration for things. And I'm saying things that people don't agree with. Like on my side of the fence, people don't agree with, but I think it's important to have these conversations because it is part of the conversation. What happens if my child's going to need 24/7 care? I'm going to do it because I'm the parent and I love my child. I want to do this. However, now I'm not going to be able to work. Are there circumstances where I'm going to have a health aide or somebody else come in and assist with that? That's going to be money. And it's either going to be taxpayer funded programs that are doing it, or it's going to be my own personal stuff that's going to take care of it. So, children are expensive, but children with special needs and extra care are much more expensive under the circumstances. And that's kind of the conversation that we're not having with regard to that. And I think that under those circumstances, that should be up to the parents to decide. And that's coming from a woman. The last I checked, I was a woman.
Well, that's a reasonable, well thought out statement.
And that's like it's conversations like this that I think are important. People on my side of the fence knock Planned Parenthood. I think that Planned Parenthood is helpful within certain parameters. Again, I think abortion as a method of recurring birth control, I disagree with. If you find yourself in a situation where, oh my God, I'm pregnant, and what do I do? Especially in circumstances with regard to like teenagers and young women. Not saying that I'm not saying it for like older women and working women either, but mostly for younger women. I made a mistake. I think that, okay, you made a mistake. Do you know the saying about, making mistakes, the same mistake over and over again, that, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, shame on you type of situation? It's similar to that, okay, you get a second chance at bat in this regard. And then it's like, I'm starting to see a pattern here. That there are other forms of contraception and birth control that you could use. How did you wind up pregnant again? Like these are decisions, and actions have consequences. And I think that as a society, we've kind of turned away from that in a lot of different ways.
Well, that's teaching critical thinking, which is not something that's a curriculum in schools. That I speak at a lot of rehabs, and sometimes I'll run into young women, 20, 22 years old, that have 3 and 4 children. Mm-hmm. And I'll ask them gently, I say, birth control is free.
Exactly. I have a cousin that got pregnant at 13, delivered her first child at 14. She was pregnant again her senior year in high school, almost missed graduation because she was pregnant again. And I'm looking at it going, where did we go wrong here? Her
Who's the adult in the room?
exactly, and that was the thing is that, I'm looking and my aunt and uncle were like, "Well, she's not gonna have any sort of free time, she's gonna take care of that baby all the time." The baby came along, and they were the doting grandparents, and it was, "Oh, we'll watch the baby, you go do cheerleading because, whatever." And, like, it wasn't entirely like that, but that's kind of what it appeared to be on the outside, especially considering the fact that she was able to get pregnant
So
again.
you're talking about people enabling behavior.
Precisely. And I look at society and I ask how much of that's happening. Education, I think, is important, and not just sex ed because we generally all get sex ed in high school and junior high and stuff, but like you said, consequences and that things happen and that there is a cause and reaction type of situation. Um, and I think that that's where we've fallen apart as a society, educating people of that sort of stuff. Um, Pregnancy in high school used to be something that was shame, 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 shame. And, young women
Where's Jane at? Oh, she went to stay with her aunt for the summer.
exactly. And she would disappear and then she would come back and, we wouldn't talk about what happened when she was gone. Um, Now, you have teenagers pregnant in high school and they use it as a badge of honor in some regards. And like I don't understand how that happened. Um, and again, I think that as a society, we need to kind of look at that a little bit more. How do we, instead of reacting to the circumstance, how do we proactively approach it?
Hi, Jim Ellermeyer from Fishing Without Bait, the behavioral health therapist who helps people explode into their lives through full impact mindfulness. As most of you know, I'm in long-term recovery from drug and alcohol addiction, and one of my favorite things to do is have motivational talks at rehabs and various places where I can be of use. Now, contrary to popular belief, 12-step recovery is not about drugs, alcohol, gambling, or the 100 other groups that use 12-step behavioral change techniques. It's about having a change in your thoughts and a change in your actions. If you're interested in having a motivational speaker with interactive audience participation, we would be glad to provide that. The message that can interest people has to have depth and weight. And if you'd care to discuss that with us, if you'd care to discuss that with me, we'd be glad to show you and give you some information and tell you maybe some videos about our behavioral change techniques and how we incorporate that into our talk. You can find out more information from fishingwithoutbait.com. By helping people like in first grade, learning how to label and describe thoughts and feelings, being able to make wise versus emotional mind choices. And that's a process. That's not an event.
No, and I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. And it's something obviously that I've put a lot of thought into and asking questions and things. But even as far as our legislators, what is their motivation behind things? Again, I'm a Republican, precisely, and like I said, again, I'm a Republican, and I say that Republican legislators and Republican leaders need to have more of an open conversation and dialogue about this is what we're going to do with this instead of instead of the rioters downtown in front of the Planned Parenthood, walking with signs. And one of the most unsettling things that I have ever seen with regard to the pro-life community is it was down on Banksville Road shortly after we had moved to the city. They had a little march protest going on about anti-abortion, and they had these giant signs of it was a full color image of an aborted fetus. And as an adult, I found that disturbing. And you have children riding in these cars driving along going, "Mommy, what's that?" And I think that that's something that we also need to kind of have a conversation on is there's a time and a place for certain things. That is not the time nor place on a busy highway to have those sorts of signs going up. Um, it's
People are not mindful of the impact that their words and actions have on others.
that is fair.
Lack of critical thinking, following through, So we live in a representative democracy. Other like unlike Greece, that every citizen had a vote on a particular topic. So we have a representative democracy where we elect a representative to carry our voice into Congress. And somewhere along the line, they forget that. When they get there, they say, well, in order to do this, you've got to follow the party line. You have to obey. You have to be a good boy and girl. You all have to raise money for the party so the rest of us can get reelected.
It's interesting that like you bring that sort of thing up because while you were talking about that, I was thinking in my head about how I voted for Trump the first time because during the swamp, and that's exactly what in my opinion you've described with regard to backdoor deals and the I'm gonna do what I want to do, not necessarily representing my constituents. There's a local councilwoman here for county council, Allegheny County, who pretty much got in and stated when some of her constituents voiced concerns about some decisions that were being made by county council, she blatantly came out and said, "You guys don't know better. I'm going to vote the way that I'm going to vote because I know that this is best for this." And she didn't listen. She doesn't listen to the community. Um, that's something that's been of concern because like she blatantly said this and it was kind of a
I know better than you.
exactly. Um, and that's something that the Republican Party locally has kind of talked about is we have people doing this sort of thing. Our county council right now is trying to make themselves from part-time representatives of their constituents to full-time because they're placing 2 ballot initiatives on the ballot in November. And it's going to be worded in a way that it sounds like it's a good thing for voters. And in all actuality, the county right now is working at a budget deficit. Like we are way in the red with regard to that. They have upped our taxes, our property taxes. They are talking about reassessments, which is another way of raising our taxes. And now they're talking about bringing on full-time staff for all of our county elected officials and getting rid of the I'm not going to say this properly, but the cap with regard to how much the spending cap with regard to how much they can spend. And they're going to put it out to the constituents, but people who go and vote don't pay attention to that stuff. When I was working the polling locations, because as a Republican, I'm a recently elected Republican committee woman, and I got elected 4 years ago as committee woman, so I've re-upped my duly elected status to help with the Republican Party locally.
So then you've sold your soul to Satan, being a Republican. For what those people
that's what most people do say. And I love the fact that my friends, whenever we're talking, and Missy's a Republican, but she's one of the good ones. And I'm like, you guys say that because you know me, but most people just look and say Republican, and I'm going to wash my hands of you. I feel that my role is to do things like what we're doing right now and having an educated conversation about things. And it's interesting because, like you said, a lot of people, as soon as they hear Republican, they tune right out, and that's it. When I was working the polling location, this was, I want to say like the 2016-ish. No, I'm sorry, it would have been 2020-ish because that's when I became a committee person. The Sarah Innamorato was running for county executive. Sarah Innamorato was a state, I believe, representative prior to that. And she was running against Joe Rockey, who is a well-known businessman within the Pittsburgh area. And the job of the county executive is to run the county. So on paper, Joe Rockey has all of the credentials, all of the like he would be, if it was a job interview and you were looking at his resume versus Sarah Inamorato's resume, he would be the resume that you would be taking into consideration because he has the experience to run this position. In the last part of her race, she was talking about abortion and that she would make sure that abortion would be available for Allegheny County and that she would keep abortion on the table and that abortion. As a state representative, she had more say in writing the laws in Pennsylvania with regard to abortion than she does as the county executive.
So again, we're talking about electability.
And we're talking about education of the voters, because voters don't know that. They don't understand how that works. So because Sarah Innamorato is saying, I'm going to protect abortion, when I worked the polls that election cycle, there were young women in their 20s coming in, and it would be one young woman with a group of 3 or 4 guys. And she would be getting them through the door. And as they're coming into the door, she's talking. She's like, you're going to vote for this, 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 and this. And okay. So they would all go and they would vote. And then she would wait at the door and collect all of them at the door and say, okay, you voted for this, this, and this, right? And she would double check and they'd be walking back out. An hour or so later, a different woman, another group of a few different men would be coming in, same thing, rinse, repeat all day long. This is what was going on. You would have people coming in just saying, I'm going to vote straight ticket Democrat. And it's like, okay, that's your prerogative on things. That's cool. But what good does that do when it comes down to electing people to represent your...
Well, people are allowed to think and feel however they think and feel. So how are we going to get out of these weeds and develop a singleness of purpose, develop a mission statement for the United States of America? How are we going to resolve some of these differences? When I was young, which was obviously before yesterday, people used to say, when they would see their time, they would say, my respected opponent.
Exactly.
That never happens.
No. And that's the thing is, we talk about the adult in the room, the person who takes responsibility for things, the person who steps up and does the right thing. One of the nice things about the Republican podcast that I do is we talk about the right thing to do. And, it's obviously that's the right thing is perspective based, but treating people with respect is the easiest way to... Mr. Rogers taught us that.
We'll be back to continue this conversation on our next podcast. And as always, a free prescription, fruits, nuts, and vegetables. Unplug your television and take up fishing. And for a truly mindful experience, we suggest that you fish without bait. Do a kindness for yourself and do a kindness for another. Forgive yourself and forgive another. Till all are free, none are free. Stay mindful.
Please check out our website at fishingwithoutbait.com, where you can listen to the show, comment on our discussions, and find out where you can subscribe to our podcast. If you're interested in flying the colors of Fishing Without Bait, click the shop icon on our website. We have clothing, mugs, cell phone cases, and so much more. Show the world that you fish without bait. This show is a member of the Sorgatron Media Podcast Network. Find out more at sorgatronmedia.com.